Okay, let's take a look at this T-account analysis of cost flow problems. We're dealing with the Gainer company, and we have the information in T-account form that you see on the screen. So it looks like under raw materials, we started out with 50,000. We added debits of 350,000. They're not giving us the credits, but we had an ending balance of 40,000. And there's other information as well. Let's start working on this problem on a separate tab. But let's look at requirement 1. To the left of my mouse, I'll read it. What was the cost of raw materials put into production during the year? Alright, well here's what we know. We know 50,000 was available at the beginning. There was debits of 350,000, and we ended at 40,000. So to work number 1, let me do this. I'll just put a number 1 here. What we'll do is we'll jot down what we know. We know the raw materials inventory at the beginning of the year was equal to $50,000, right? And let me format these in a way that'll make sense to us. Then we had debits, which were examples of purchases of materials. And I believe, we'll go back, I think that was 350,000, right? To the left of my mouse was 350,000, then we ended with 40,000. Okay, so what that tells us is if we add those two together, we can come up with the materials available for use. And the materials available for use, we just sum from above, is 400,000. Then we had raw material inventory at the end. I'm going to copy from here. And the end of the year was 12/31, was $40,000. And from that, we can then subtract out what was available at the end of the year from the material that was available for use during the year to derive the materials requisitioned for production. And that had to be the 400,000 less the 40,000, or 360,000. And I'll bold that because that's the answer to part 1. Let's take a look at number 2. I want to jot that this way. There we go. And number 2 asks us, how much of the material in one above consisted of indirect materials? Alright, well what we know is 360 is what we start with. And then if we look over here to debits to work in process, we see there was a debit of direct materials of 310,000. So if our raw materials consists of both direct and indirect materials, then the difference must have been the indirect. So let me go back here and show you. There's the 310 to the left of my mouse coming from direct materials. So we're going to say what's the indirect materials? Requisitioned. I'm going to abbreviate this for production. Would have been equal to the 360,000 less the 310,000 that we identified as debits. So that net amount would have been 50,000. Now let's make sure that's what the question was. How much of the materials in one above consisted of indirect materials? And we've answered that one. It's $50,000. Okay, now let's tackle number 3. And number 3 asks us, how much of the factory labor cost for the year consisted of indirect labor? Alright, so let's write down what the total factory wages were accrued during the year. And let me sort of spread this so we've got enough room to write that in here. And then I'll shrink this a little bit. Okay, total factory wages accrued during the year. We can get that by looking at the credits to the factory wages payable account. So that's our factory wages payable account, and the total credits represent the amount we're transferring to jobs, if you will, or to work in process, is 520,000. So we'll go over here and we'll jot down that 520,000. And then we need to subtract out any direct labor costs. Okay? And if we look at the direct labor cost from work in process, we see there was a debit of 500,000. Okay, so 500,000 was applied as direct labor. So if I put in the 500,000, then if I subtract the 500 from the 520, we're able to determine what the indirect labor cost would be, and it's $20,000, and that takes care of part 3. Now let's take a look at number 4. All right, let me slide a little bit so we can see. To the left of my mouse it says what was the cost of goods manufactured for the year. And that one's relatively easy to find. When we're done with work in process, we have to transfer it to cost of goods sold. The transfer process means we would reduce work in process and debit cost of goods sold. Okay, since right there above my mouse is the only credit, the 1,000,006 must be the number we're looking for. So I will drop in here as cost of goods manufactured, and I'll abbreviate, is the 1,000,006. And that's the correct answer for number 4. Now on number 5, let's see what we're going to be asked here. What was the cost, I'm reading to the left of my mouse now, what was the cost of goods sold for the year before considering underapplied or overapplied overhead? Okay, let's go back here. What we need to do is sort of work a cost of goods sold schedule to come up with this. So let's start off with finished goods inventory at the beginning of the year. And that number was, looks like 100,000 to the left of my mouse. So I'll jot in the 100,000. And then we need to add to that the cost of goods manufactured, right? And we get that from the work in process account. We already calculated that, so we'll just reference that cell. It's the 1,000,006. And then what we come up with is finished goods available for sale. Usually that can be called just goods available for sale. And if I sum from above, I get 1,000,007. And then we subtract off the finished goods in inventory at the end of the year. So we'll jot down the end of the year amount. And let's go find out what that number was. Oh, it ended it to the left of my mouse at 200,000. So we jot in that, and now I do my little subtraction where I take the 1,000,007 available less the 200,000 in ending, and I come up with cost of goods sold. And I believe that's what they asked for in number 5. What was cost of goods sold for the year? So we've taken care of number 5. All right, let's take a look at number 6. Number 6 asks us, if overhead is applied to production on the basis of direct labor cost, what rate was in effect during the year? Okay, so let's figure out that overhead rate and how we would do that. We've got to figure out what was the manufacturing overhead cost applied, and then we're going to divide that by, let me draw a line under here to represent it's going to be divided by the direct labor cost. And then we'll jot in the numbers here and then compute the answer. So let me slide a little bit here. Okay, well the manufacturing overhead cost is that debit to work in process right there of 750,000. So we know we've applied that to work in process because we're able to get that from the T account, and then the direct labor amount comes from that 500,000 also applied to work in process. Okay, so we jot in the 500,000. And then if we do the division, we're able to come up with the predetermined, if I can spell it right, overhead rate, and I'm going to abbreviate that. And that would be equal to, I'm going to do my little underline here, 750 divided by the 500,000, or a predetermined overhead rate of $1.50 per direct labor dollar. But typically that would be shown as a percentage, so 150% of direct labor dollars. Okay? And I'll state this as percentage of direct labor cost. Okay? All right, let's tackle number 7 now. Number 7, let me slide here. Number 7 says, what manufacturing overhead under-applied or over-applied? Or what was the manufacturing overhead and under-applied or over-applied, and by how much? We need to figure out, was it under-applied or over-applied first? Okay, well, on number 7, let's put together a quick schedule so we can calculate that. All right, so the actual overhead incurred, or actual overhead cost for the year, we look for debits to our overhead account. And we've got 765 right above my mouse there. So we jot that in. And then we need to do the amount that was applied. And the amount that was applied, we already calculated in number 6 above, which also was that 750,000 to the left of the mouse, right? So the debit to the work in process is what was applied. Let me just reference that cell so I don't have to type it. And so the end result is we've got a difference which represents under-applied overhead. And it's under-applied because the actual overhead exceeded the amount that was applied to inventory. So we'll do a little subtraction here. And we calculate $15,000. Oh, by the way, I haven't been bolding these. Let me go back and bold those to show that those are the answers. And then finally we tackle number 8. Number 8 asks us, let me slide down here, compute, now I'm just above my mouse here, compute the ending balance in the work in process account, the work in process inventory account. Assume that this balance consists entirely of goods started during the year. If 20,000 of this balance is direct labor cost, how much of it is direct material cost and manufacturing overhead cost? Okay, so the ending balance is how much? Okay, well, if we look at that work in process and you run a quick calculation on that, what you come up with is 100 plus 310 gets you to 410, right? Then you got another 1250 with the last two items, ones that appear here, right? So that gets me up to, what is that in total? 100, 310, 500. I'll go real slow so that we get this right. 1660 less 160 of the credit gives us a 60,000 work in process balance. Okay, so let's write that down. Let's say the balance in WIP, I'm just abbreviating here, at 1231 was equal to 60,000. Okay? Then we would have to subtract what was the direct labor cost, and they gave that in the problem as saying that was $20,000. And then I believe they also said the manufacturing overhead cost. No. Then we have to compute the manufacturing overhead cost. Okay, and the trick here is that it is applied at 150% of direct labor. So we need to take the 220,000 times, you could do it at 150%, right? You could just type that in, or you could type it as 1.5, since that's the same number. You come up with 30,000. Let me slide a little bit. And then that would compute how much of the work in process is consisted of direct materials cost. Okay, so that's the remainder. And how we do that then is we take the 60,000 less the 20,000 less the 30,000, and we come up with 10,000, and that is the answer to number 8. And that takes care of this problem, everyone. Okay, I just slid back up to the top to show you some of the earlier answers, and I hope you found this beneficial. Thank you.